Chapter 59 of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Harris. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 59. Lorna Gone Away. Although there are very ancient tales of gold being found upon Exmoor, in lumps and solid hummocks, and of men who slew one another for it, this deep digging and great labour seemed to me a dangerous and unholy enterprise. And Master Huckaback confessed that up to the present time his two partners and himself, for they proved to be 3 adventurers, had put into the earth more gold than they had taken out of it. Nevertheless he felt quite sure that it must in a very short time succeed, and pay them back an hundredfold. And he pressed me with great earnestness to join them, and work there as much as I could without moving my mother's suspicions. I asked him how they had managed so long to carry on without discovery, and he said that this was partly through the wildness of the neighbourhood, and the legends that frightened people of a superstitious turn, partly through their own great caution, and the manner of fetching both supplies and implements by night, but most of all they had to thank the troubles of the period, the suspicions of rebellion, and the terror of the Doones, which, like the wizard I was speaking of, kept folk from being too inquisitive where they had no business. The slough, moreover, had helped them well, both by making their access dark, and yet more by swallowing up and concealing all that was cast from the mouth of the pit. Once, before the attack on Glen Doone, they had a narrow escape from the King's Commissioner, for Captain Stickles, having heard no doubt the story of John Fry, went with 6 troopers on purpose to search the neighbourhood. Now if he had ridden alone, most likely he would have discovered everything, but he feared to venture so, having suspicion of a trap. Coming as they did in a company, all mounted and conspicuous, the watchman, who was posted now on the top of the hill, almost every day since John Fry's appearance, could not help espying them, miles distant, over the moorland. He watched them under the shade of his hand, and presently ran down the hill, and raised a great commotion. Then Simon Carfax and all his men came up, and made things natural, removing every sign of work, and finally, sinking underground, drew across the mouth of the pit a hurdle thatched with sedge and heather. Only Simon himself was left behind, ensconced in a hole of the crags, to observe the doings of the enemy. Captain Stickles rode very bravely, with all his men clattering after him, down the rocky pass, and even to the margin of the slough. And there they stopped, and held counsel, for it was a perilous thing to risk the passage upon horseback, between the treacherous brink and the cliff, unless one knew it thoroughly. Stickles, however, and one follower, carefully felt the way along, having their horses well in hand, and bearing a rope to draw them out, in case of being foundered. Then they spurred across the rough boggy land, farther away than the shaft was. Here the ground lay jagged and shaggy, wrought up with high tufts of reed, or scragged with stunted brushwood; and between the ups and downs, which met anybody anyhow, green-covered places tempted the foot, and black bog-holes discouraged it. It is not to be marvelled at that amid such place as this, for the first time visited, the horses were a little skeary, and their riders partook of the feeling, as all good riders do. In and out of the tufts they went, with their eyes dilating, wishing to be out of harm, if conscience were but satisfied. And of this tufty, flaggy ground, pocked with bogs and boglets, one especial nature is that it will not hold impressions. Seeing thus no track of men, nor anything but marsh work and storm work and of the seasons, these 2 honest men rode back, and were glad to do so. For above them hung the mountains, cowled with fog, and seamed with storm, and around them desolation, and below their feet the grave. Hence they went, with all good will, and vowed for ever afterwards that fear of a simple place like that was only too ridiculous. So they all rode home with mutual praises, and their courage well approved, and the only result of the expedition was to confirm John Fry's repute as a bigger liar than ever. Now I had enough of that underground work, as before related, to last me for a year to come. Neither would I, for the sake of gold, have ever stepped into that bucket of my own goodwill again. But when I told Lorna, whom I could trust in any matter of secrecy, as if she had never been a woman, all about my great descent, and the honeycombing of the earth, and the mournful noise at eventide, when the gold was under the crusher and bewailing the mischief it must do, then Lorna's chief desire was to know more about Simon Carfax. "It must be our Gwenny's father," she cried, "the man who disappeared underground, and whom she has ever been seeking. How grieved the poor little thing will be, if it should turn out, after all, that he left his child on purpose. I can hardly believe it, can you, John?" "Well," I replied, "all men are wicked, more or less, to some extent, and no man may say otherwise." For I did not wish to commit myself to an opinion about Simon, lest I might be wrong, and Lorna think less of my judgment. But being resolved to see this out, and do a good turn, if I could, to Gwenny, who had done me many a good one, I begged my Lorna to say not a word of this matter to the handmaiden, until I had further searched it out. And to carry out this resolve, I went again to the place of business, where they were grinding gold as freely as an apothecary at his pills. Having now true right of entrance, and being known to the watchman, and regarded, since I cracked the boulder, as one who could pay his footing, and perhaps would be the master, when Uncle Ben should be choked with money, I found the corb sent up to me rather sooner than I wished it. For the smell of the places underground, and the way men's eyes came out of them, with links and brands and flambeaux, instead of God's light to look at, were to me a point of caution rather than of pleasure. No doubt but what some men enjoy it, being born, like worms, to dig and to live in their own scoopings. Yet even the worms come up sometimes, after a good soft shower of rain, and hold discourse with one another; whereas these men, and the horses let down, come above ground never. And the changing of the sky is half the change our nature calls for. Earth we have, and all its produce, moving from the first appearance, and the hope with infant's eyes, through the bloom of beauty's promise, to the rich and ripe fulfilment, and the falling back to rest. Sea we have, with all its wonder shed on eyes and ears and heart, and the thought of something more. But without the sky to look at, what would earth and sea and even our own selves be to us? Do we look at earth with hope? Yes, for victuals only. Do we look at sea with hope? Yes, that we may escape it. At the sky alone, though questioned with the doubts of sunshine or scattered with uncertain stars, at the sky alone we look with pure hope and with memory. Hence it always hurt my feelings when I got into that bucket, with my small clothes turned up over, and a kerchief round my hat. But knowing that my purpose was sound, and my motives pure, I let the sky grow to a little blue hole, and then to nothing over me. At the bottom Master Carfax met me, being captain of the mine, and desirous to know my business. He wore a loose sack round his shoulders, and his beard was 2 feet long. "My business is to speak with you," I answered rather sternly; for this man, who was nothing more than Uncle Reuben's servant, had carried things too far with me, showing no respect whatever; and though I did not care for much, I liked to receive a little, even in my early days. "Coom into the muck hole, then," was his gracious answer; and he led me into a filthy cell where the miners changed their jackets. "Simon Carfax," I began, with a manner to discourage him, "I fear you are a shallow fellow, and not worth my trouble." "Then don't take it," he replied; "I want no man's trouble." "For your sake I would not," I answered; "but for your daughter's sake I will, the daughter whom you left to starve so pitifully in the wilderness." The man stared at me with his pale gray eyes, whose colour was lost from candlelight, and his voice as well as his body shook, while he cried,